Hey, Noah, can you throw this away for me? Silence.
Mm.
He's standing next to me. I know he's there. I glance, double check. Second time, I said, Noah, here's the piece of paper. Can you throw that away? I could have thrown this thing away. It's sheer laziness on my part, but I'm just used to saying, hey, Noah, can you do this? And after the third time, I turned to look at him and I realized he got this serious look on his face. And I said, dude, can you go throw this away? And he looks at me and very straight arrowed, straight in the eyes. He says, Dad, I'm not your slave.
Mm.
Yeah, as if I needed to feel smaller.
Welcome to the SkilledDad podcast. This is the podcast for dads of all seasons to learn the things that they can do and engage so that they can go and equip the next generation for success. Here we sit down with everyday dads just like you to learn from their story, get inspired, and then start getting after it. So we invite you to join in, see what you can take away from this story, and apply to your life on your journey to becoming the skilled dad.
Hey guys, and welcome to the SkilledDad podcast. My name's Zach Reeser. I'm your host of this podcast, and today I'm really excited. We've got a guest here. We've rescheduled a couple times because that's just life as a dad, and you got to find the time that works. And I'm so glad that I could sit down here with Kris Hammons, who's joined me today. And we've known each other for a number of years. We've sat down and had coffee together. I've got to learn his story, and he's going to share some of that with us. And he's got a really unique story. And so I'm excited. So Kris, thanks for sitting down with me and joining me on the SkilledDad podcast.
Well, thanks a lot, Jack. This is, like you said, has been a long time coming, so I'm excited to sit down with you.
Heck yeah, we're going to have some fun. And just a little bit about Kris, and I want him to be able to share all the cool things that he has going on currently. But he is a motivational speaker and a really fun guy to be around, not a professional kind of connection there, but they all work together, Kris. I'm just saying they work together. And your niche kind of is unique in that you really kind of focus on dwarfism.
Right. And obviously the life lessons that come out of that, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's the biggest piece of like sharing your story, not just going through things, but not just merely enduring, but how do you overcome challenges?
Mm-hmm. And we all have our own kind of unique set of challenges that we have. And one of the purposes of this podcast is we can kind of figure things out on our own and go the lone wolf route, or we can have probably a mix of that. We're always going to have a mix of that, as well as taking lessons from other guys. And so, that's what I love to sit down and talk about. And so, Kris, I'd really just kind of love to hand it over to you, and we'll start out with the dreaded question of tell us a little bit about yourself. You take it wherever you want to go.
Yes. So as you mentioned, I focus on dwarfism, and if you get out by now, I am a dwarf. I'd stand at 4'5". I like to say 4'6", but we'll go with 4'5". And so, and to clear it up, I have had dwarfism my whole life, and yes, I have been asked that question. I am married, live here in the Nashville area.
Yep.
Have 4 kids. I'll back up. So I'm 4 years old, just turned 40 this year. So I'm.
I didn't realize that. Congratulations. We're right there together, man.
Old. Yes.
Experienced, seasoned.
Yeah, that's how I like to think about it. It's kind of like bourbon. We get better with age.
There we go.
Yeah, so I was born in Dallas, Texas. My parents were not dwarves or little people is another common term. So I was a complete surprise. I came a little early in terms of I was about 3 or 4 weeks premature. Um, Moved around while I was a kid, but went on to get married to another lady who is also has dwarfism, and she does not have it in her family either. So both of us are, as we like to say, spontaneous combustions. But because, obviously you can get it inherited, but it also can happen spontaneously.
Hmm.
Another fun fact, there are over 400 different types of dwarfism.
Oh, wow.
So I have one type, which is more rare. And my wife has a more common type. I won't even try naming mine because it's too hard to say. But yeah, we got married about 13 years ago. We have 4 kids. Originally, we lived in Kentucky. Neither of us had roots there. We went to college at Eastern Kentucky University.
Mm-hmm.
And moved down here about 8 years ago. Love it down here. We have 2 average-sized children. So that is possible. Our firstborn is average size. He's 11. His name's Noah. We have a 9-year-old girl named Jubilee. She has dwarfism, has my type, so the more rare type. And then we have a 6-year-old, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point because he has a pretty crazy story. His name's Zacchaeus. And lo and behold, he actually has both my type and my wife's type.
Which is really rare, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very rare.
We'll definitely touch on that because I remember when you shared that with me, and that's really
it's a crazy story for sure. Yeah. And then we also have a 5-year-old. And as if we didn't have enough going on with 3 kids, one of them having a lot of medical issues, we decided to adopt. And my nephew in 2020, again, my year's messed up here, 2020. So we adopted him. He is 5. His name's Asher, and he is average size. So that's pretty much us in a nutshell. Like you said, I'm doing some motivational speaking, doing some writing on the side, but focused on the speaking part right now.
Yeah. So, and full transparency, I'm not as familiar with kind of all the ins and outs, hereditary versus kind of the spontaneous side that you talked about.
Right.
And also when you told me, that you've got your average size, so Noah's average size, right? And so,
yes.
And just, out of curiosity, how old is Noah? Is he 11, you said?
He's 11.
Yeah. What's that like? I mean, because he's a pretty tall guy, isn't he?
He is. He's past me in height around 8 years old, 9 years old. So he's been taller than me. And let me just set the stage. Like I mentioned, 4'5" is pretty tall in the dwarfism world.
Mm-hmm.
My wife is 3'11", so just under 4 feet. He passed her a long time ago, and he was like 5. So he's definitely not tallest for his age, but he's pretty tall compared to us.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting dynamic. My wife and I have a good perspective of what it's like growing up in an average size world.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a lonely place if you let it.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine growing up average size in a little person world where not only our house is not custom made. I'm not talking about in the sense of, obviously we grew up in average size houses, had to reach for things. We still have that today. Like we just had modifications like stores around the house. What I mean is that for him and his world, and even now becoming more so Asher as well, Noah, our oldest, he, by all accounts, he's a completely, quote, normal child. He didn't have this crazy birth story, although he kind of did. I'll touch on that later, but not really to him or his health. He gets asked to do a lot. So we have to be careful about that. Because it's like, it can easily turn into, Noah, get this, Noah, reach that. Can you can you pick this up for us? Can you lift this? So he gets asked to do a lot. Now, thankfully for us, he is a natural born worker. Like he wants to jump in and help. He wants to, be helpful wherever he can.
Mm-hmm.
But he's relatively quiet, so we have to be careful to make sure he has a voice. I'll tell you one quick story. One Saturday, it was springtime, typical spring cleaning mode. I'm out in the garage. My wife is inside, cleaning inside, having them clean the rooms and whatnot. And it's turning into one of those scenarios where my wife needed Noah to help her with some things inside the house. A few days later, he gets to come outside because he's done enough work inside. And he's looking for something to do. And I'm working, I'm at my workbench out in the garage, and I was going through stuff, cleaning stuff out. And I'd come across something, and I said, "Hey, Noah, can you throw this away for me?" Silence.
Hmm.
And he's standing next to me. I know he's there. I glance, double check. Second time, I said, "Noah, here's the piece of paper. Can you throw that away?" I could have thrown this thing away. It's sheer laziness on my part, but I'm just used to saying, "Hey, Noah, can you do this?" And after the third time, I turned to look at him, and I realized he got this serious look on his face. And I said, "Dude, can you go throw this away?" And he looks at me and very straight arrowed, straight in the eyes. He says, "Dad, I'm not your slave."
Mm.
Yeah, as if I needed to feel smaller.
Mm.
That had me feeling pretty small. And I looked at him, and it was a realization, like, yeah, I can go through this way. I don't need him to do it just because it's convenient. And so I went down, I grabbed him by the shoulders, looked into his eyes, and I said, "Thank you for telling me that. You're right. I can't do this way. I'm going to go do that."
Mm.
I said, you only get to be a boy for so long. Go be a boy, go play.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that was a big moment because he is naturally quiet.
Yeah.
And he also, he will sometimes feel the pressure of just doing things. So we've had to be really careful of like, "Hey, no, this is a favor versus this is what you're being told to do."
Right.
So we try to really
short
split.
list.
Right. Kind of like, this is your short list, or this is just something we need help with. Like, maybe we could do it, but it would be a lot easier if he could do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just one of those, it's one of those situations where you just have to balance that.
Yeah.
And he, thankfully, for as quiet as he is, he has done that a few other times, but that moment still sticks out to me.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just the recall that you got on is an impactful one. And I mean, there's other circumstances that you have as far as him being able to reach things and all. Most of your story kind of hits home for me because our firstborn, similar thing, where he's now to the point where he can do a lot. And so he has his list, but we just had this conversation recently because he helps so much and he has his two younger siblings that we're like, ooh, we've got to be careful that we're not doing or asking too much because of our own laziness. And some of it works out really well. Some of it's like, yeah. Right. So I'm just kind of processing your story through the eyes that I've had on similar circumstances. So that might be a thing for us with the older firstborns. I like what you said. It's like, you only have so much time to go be a boy. Go be a boy. Go be a kid. Go have fun.
Yeah. He's innately serious too. So we have to kind of like, dude, he has his own little business, and it's just like, dude, you don't have to be serious all the time. You can go play. We ask a lot of you.
Yeah. So
go and let loose.
You said he has his own little business?
Yeah, he takes trash cans out for some of the neighbors. He put flyers out. I was pretty hardcore with him on that as well. Meaning he talked about it for a long time, and I said, told him, I said, well, that's great, but I really don't want to hear what you're talking about. I want to see what you do about it.
Oof.
And I said, well, if you bring me a first draft of a flyer, and I have a history of graphic design work. And so if you bring me a first draft of a flyer, just type out what you want on it, or what you think you want on it.
Mhm.
And I will help you flesh it out, and we'll print them and you can go deliver them. And to his credit, now he talked about it, talked a big game for a while. Finally brings me a working draft, and we knocked it out in about an hour. And the next day they were in every mailbox on our street. He got 3 clients. And the cool thing is that I can count on one hand. He's been doing it for about a year. I can count on one hand how many times I've had to remind him, like, hey, don't forget, your clients are waiting on you to take the trash out or go put the trash can back. So, but it's great. Teaches them how to interact with people.
Entrepreneurship.
And voice people, entrepreneurship for sure.
I mean, if in a whole year, less than one hand, that's probably better than some of us when we get reminded. In our own household, he's doing good.
I'm trying to do a weekly newsletter, and half the time it's like, it goes out. My goal is to have it out every Wednesday at 6 a.m. And it's more often than not, I'm like 2 p.m. or 10 p.m. on Tuesday night trying to make sure I got stuff queued up. So he's way ahead of me in that game.
You might want to bring him on board as a consultant.
I think so.
Just to get you going.
Right.
Oh, I love it. You mentioned it. Tell me about your newsletter. I don't think I knew that you had one rolling out.
Yeah. So our newsletter right now, and I don't know if you knew, but I've been pretty active on LinkedIn for the past year.
I have seen that.
I have always wanted to write a book, and kind of like my son, except worse, way worse. I kind of hem and hawed on it for a long time. And there's another side of that, but I'll come back to that. But in order to build a writing habit, I committed to writing on LinkedIn every day for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just to test out content, just throw stories up, see what people liked hearing. And so I did that for a year. The goal was always to transition to a newsletter. So I backed off of the LinkedIn. I still post, but not every day. So it's a weekly newsletter. Not really sure what it's going to become.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where I'm posting every week and kind of see where it goes. It's called Growing Grit. Premise is, here's my story. Here's how I learned what grit was. And here's why I believe it's not just something you're born with or not, but something you can develop and start to unpack what that looks like. And I kind of tell stories around that. I think we can get to more than just once a week. And I think it might become some sort of digest. It might even become a podcast at some point. So, because I wanted to help other people tell their stories as well.
Yeah. I love that. All right. Growing Grit. I'm going to sign up. I have seen the content they've been putting on LinkedIn. I actually have a question about that.
Sure. So,
for a lot of the guys that listen, the ones that I know, there's a lot that I don't personally know. There's a lot that I do know. I've had some conversations kind of around, kind of like your son, right? We've got all these grand ideas. We have things we want to go do and talk about. And then it's just a matter of like, all right, I'm so tired of hearing about it. Just go do it and show me. Writing on LinkedIn, I'm interested to hear your experience in that, because it's one of those things that for some reason it's easier for me to get on a microphone and talk and do this and just put it out, and you're like, oh, let's see what happens, versus putting it on like LinkedIn. I don't do a lot of social stuff personally,
right.
But LinkedIn's one of those that I've always enjoyed. But it's more of the idea of like really putting yourself out there. So I'm curious kind of your experience with that, when you're like, okay, I'm going to do it. Here's what I've kind of experienced through that. And here's what I found, being however long you are since you started doing that.
I tell you the biggest lesson. I'll give you one aspirational lesson, or maybe soft lessons, better word, and a couple of hard skill lessons that I've learned. One thing we will never regret is starting. We'll regret a lot of things in our lives, but I don't think we'll ever regret starting. And like I mentioned, I'd always wanted to write a book. And I sat down, had coffee. Just here in town. I think you and I have been there before, but
Mm-hmm.
and I expressed interest to this close friend of mine. I said, "Yeah, I really want to write a book." And he kind of just gave me a stare. He was former military. He gave me a serious look, and he's like, "Why haven't you?" And I was like, and before I could really utter any lame excuse out of my mouth, he's like, "Well, I really don't have anything else for you." He had had a background in the writing publishing world, and he was like, "You're gonna whatever you write now, you're gonna hate 5 years from now. So you just need to sit and write. It doesn't really matter what it is, and just hit publish." And then his straight shooter advice is like, go publish an ebook and start there, because you're gonna hate it in 2 years anyway. And then you'll learn that practice. And so LinkedIn for me was just to build the writing habit, and to build the habit of, hey, I'm going to really not like this 2 weeks from now, and that's okay. Somebody's going to probably like it. The tactical side, like how do you come up with the content? For me, that one thing I learned, this was a hard skill I learned, people really just like stories. I mean, you can go ahead and give them tips all you want. There's value in that for sure. The magic happens when you can marry well-written content with valuable subject matter or a lesson wrapped up with a story really well.
Mm-hmm.
And having had 20 surgeries, been in a, narrowly escaped a bus fire, and being told that I would have to hold my son for the last time, all while having dwarfism and facing that every day.
Mm-hmm.
I have no shortage of stories to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So the storytelling aspect was always really easy to me, but I struggle with the same thing that you're saying. Like, they really want to read this? And it turns out that my best performing posts are, even on LinkedIn, a professional platform, so they say, even there, people just want to hear stories. Whenever you can put a lesson into it, that's even better.
Mm-hmm. No, that's what you say about the professional versus personal. This isn't necessarily a LinkedIn episode, but it's interesting because it makes me think about, did you by chance, I didn't put you on the spot, but did you hear the episode with Trey Shinneman?
I haven't.
Okay. I'd be interested to get your take on that, because I think you're familiar with Trey.
Yep.
But the audio quality, we had an issue, but we cut through it anyway. But there's this piece that's interesting as far as the professional and personal, and then as dads, what we learn in the professional setting, we're trained on, the skills that we learn, both soft and hard. And
Right.
then, many of us have the opportunity to have this really cool arsenal of tools and skill sets we've learned. And then we walk into the home, and sometimes it seems like a lot of those things are just completely separate. They don't necessarily apply, or we just kind of forget that we know them. And by we, I mean, me and apparently the mouse in my pocket. But it's one of those things where we've learned these things, then we get into the home space. But I'm translating that to the LinkedIn side of things. There's typically business lessons out of personal stories, because they both involve humans. They both involve working with people or going through a challenge and overcoming a problem. So, I think that could be why some of your best performing stuff, being both personal, there's still takeaways on there from a professional setting. Same with this podcast.
For sure.
So one of my takeaways from you that I like, and then I want to hear more about those stories you're referencing, is we're never going to regret starting. And this little course I was taking recently was talking, it's an entrepreneurship type thing. And there was polls that were done and how many people had an idea to a problem that clearly they saw, and all the talk, but the percentage that didn't do anything about it, I mean, it was like low 20s, which actually is,
Right.
decent, that actually do something about it. So maybe for anyone listening that's got an idea, put yourself out there and just start it. See what happens. Could go nowhere, but you probably are going to learn some good stuff from it.
Yeah, the pain of regret's always going to be stronger than the pain of failure. You live with failure, it'll go away, but regret never goes away.
That's true. So you just teased with like a burning bus story. And then, I know I'd love to, if you're open to sharing some of Zacchaeus' story. I'm curious about the burning bus thing. What happened there?
Yeah, it's great timing because my Noah, our 11-year-old, just came back from his first time going to church camp. And I went to church camp growing up. The very first time I was 12 years old, went to youth camp. We lived in Indiana, ended up going up to Whitewater, Wisconsin. And I went to some pretty smaller churches growing up. Nothing like what we have around here in Nashville for sure. And just to set stage, this is 1995. And so these were smaller churches. Like our church maybe sent 13, 14 kids somewhere in that neighborhood to this church camp where several churches would send their kids. And in 95 was the first year I got to go. My parents had recently got involved with this church. And remember, my mom had been through a lot with me because I had several surgeries by this point. Doctors actually had told my mom that I would never walk, talk, or live a normal life. So here I am, a 12-year-old, have survived all that. Most of it I don't remember because it happened between the ages of from birth to 6 years old.
Right.
So by this point, I'd been in the clear of most of my medical stuff at that point. And so I'm just a 12-year-old that was just kind of really recent. I kind of just realized that I was different, and I had dwarfism. But I did not like it. I still wanted to do everything that every other 12-year-old boy wanted to do.
Sure.
So I'm eager to go to camp. My mom very reluctantly agrees. She tells me, she gives me one really stern warning before I leave, which is, hey, the pastor's going to be driving. This is how small the church was. We didn't have a bus driver to take us up there. The pastor's going to be driving, and his wife is going to be in a car behind you guys. When you guys come back, the trip was scheduled to be throughout the night. And so the anticipation was like, hey, you guys are going to sleep on the ride back after camp, and you're all going to be wiped out anyway. And so she said, hey, when you come back, you have some pretty expensive hearing aids that you wear because I have hearing loss. You need to give those hearing aids to the pastor's wife. And I said, okay, cool. And of course, the pastor's wife knew that. So here we are setting up to leave late on a Friday night. I believe this was July the 1st, 1995. And we get in the bus, we head out. That night was like a fire and brimstone end of camp service. Anything you can imagine, trying to wake people up to Jesus, kids. And so I remember getting on the bus and the pastor talking to all of us about hey, here's the plan. And these are anywhere between 7 and 12-year-olds on the bus. And I remember him telling us, hey, we're going to get to Indianapolis around daybreak. And when we get there, we'll get some donuts, and whoever's been nice, we'll get the cool donuts. Everybody else will get playing, joking around, right? That's the last thing I remember, and I fall asleep. Well, I woke up. What happened was he got just outside of Chicago, a suburb called Deerfield. And she's right around the time, there's a part of the highway where the shoulder's about to end. There's, again, the toll roads. And about a mile short of the toll road's ending, he sees some smoke coming from the engine. So he pulls over, takes a look. He can see the sparks flying underneath the hood. Runs back into the front of the bus, yells everybody to get out, gets everybody out, and he does a head count and realizes he's missing one. And he does another head count, continues to see that he's missing one, can't really figure out if his math is right. Well, because I had taken my hearing aids out, did not hear any of this. And I had slapped down into the bus. This is 1 a.m. So it's pitch dark because no lights in the bus are on. So he doesn't see me. So I fall asleep to him talking about donuts. I wake up to what now is a wall of fire that has engulfed the engine, the driver's seat, and he's starting to work on the driver's seat, which also means the front entrance. And next thing I know, I stand up, kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. I woke up to a sound, either God himself or a window popping out of the bus, I don't know. But I woke up to this loud popping sound. Wall of fire, turn around. About the time I look at the back of the bus, the back door opens. And he had realized that he was missing one, and that one was me. And so I run to the back, jump out the back door. He catches me, thankfully, and takes about 2 or 3 steps the other direction, and the backdraft occurred, and we just hear,
ooh,
and the whole thing was gone.
Like seconds after you got out?
Right.
That's crazy.
So that's the bus fire story. We got to stay in a hotel that night. The funny part is that my mom did not understand. Like, there was confusion because both the pastor's wife, who was in a separate car, and my parents didn't really understand. Like, they thought I was just the last in line. And the pastor said, no, like he was the last one, like I had to go back and get him. And so the reality of the situation didn't hit my parents until I got home. I'll never forget this moment. My mom just sobbed her eyes out. Like, she grabs me. Here's this mom that almost lost her kid through all these traumatic medical issues of the baby who makes it and almost perishes in a bus fire. It was the first time, I'll be really honest with you, and this is what the book's going to be about. In that moment, I became very present to the weight of that situation. And that presence, being forced to be in that present moment with her, is what led me to realize that, man, there's somebody else in charge here. And I feel like there's a purpose to my life. And so kind of what I'm writing about is like, how does our presence lead us to our purpose? So yeah, that's the bus story fire, or bus fire story. And it had a profound
the inspiration
impact
to your book.
Right.
When is that coming out?
2 years, the way to put me on the spot. TBD right now, but actually talking to a couple of publishers. So
attaboy. I'm going to stay on you now.
All right, please do.
But hey, man, don't want to hear about it. I want to see you. I want to see those flyers.
All right.
I got a guy who can do graphic design. No, that's an incredible story. And I love that, it's something that you can take away and then become actionable on it.
Right.
And kind of use that outside of it sounds like it's something you'd see in a movie, That's pretty wild, man. That's very wild. And so what else? So when you take that story and the presence piece and kind of the moving into the purpose side of it, has any of that experience or, the things that you experienced as you were growing up through those different challenges helped you kind of on your journey as a dad with your own kids?
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially in the last couple of years. probably a good segue for to talk a little bit about Zacchaeus. But he's our 6-year-old. I mentioned earlier, he has both my type and my wife's type.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important because it ended up being a catalyst for some other great stuff I've been working on with myself. But he was born in 2017. We knew going into it that he likely had dwarfism. What we didn't know is that upon being born, he had a lot of breathing difficulties, was immediately put on a ventilator.
Mm-hmm.
Even originally, they was like, hey, he needs some help breathing, but he'll probably be fine in a month or so. So we get into this, we're a couple of days into this journey, and has his first rough patch, like the ventilator wasn't really working. He was actually born in a smaller hospital here and had to be transferred to a larger hospital in Nashville because of the type of ventilator they had up there. And that was the signal to us that, like, this is more than just some, 3-week to a month journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that started what ended up being a 10-month-long journey, where he was in the NICU for almost a solid year. And about midway through that is when we discovered, like, with dwarfism, it's all skeletal. It's a abnormality in the way that your bones grow, specifically your bone endings, the endings of your bones. And so as a child develops and grows, you can start to see signs, even if you're not sure or you're wondering. And so he showed us signs as he was getting bigger, even though he's going through all this trauma with breathing and being on a ventilator 24/7. As he was growing, we're like, wow, he looks like he has physical traits of both my type and my wife's type. And the doctors actually initially pushed back to like, no, he wouldn't have made it if that was the case. There's no way he has both. So I did some digging in medical journals and found 3 cases that were his combination of my type and my wife's type. And none of those cases lived beyond like 15 months.
Wow.
And so, and all largely due to breathing problems. And that's when we knew we had to do what we call a tracheostomy, where we put in an artificial airway. And by this point, he actually got transferred again to Vanderbilt Children's. So he was transferred a total of 2 times. We get him to Vanderbilt. That was when they said, we need to trach him. Oh, and this will be the hardest thing you ever do. And they weren't lying at all. A month after being trached, when you do a tracheostomy on a kid, you have to paralyze them. You have to keep them sedated for weeks because you're dealing with the airway. You don't want a baby, especially a 6-month-old by this point, to wake up and start pulling stuff. And he was certainly that age. And so he had been sedated, but he just didn't do well when we tried taking the sedation off. Finally hit a point on July 31st of that year, which is our anniversary. He coded or went into a cardiac arrest 8 times. And he was just going beyond going sideways at this point. I mean, my wife and I finally hit this point. We're just like, well, maybe it's time to let go. So the next morning after, this is now August 1st, he still isn't doing well. We have him sedated because we can't lift anything. He's, it seemed like a hopeless proposition, but we knew there's no way for a 6-month-old to live. So we agreed to a do not resuscitate order. We lined up the kids to come be with us. And for all intents and purposes, we were planning to hold him for the last time that day. So some coworkers came and prayed over him. Some other things happened it all happened very fast. And we ended up having another doctor didn't really agree with to not resuscitate. And so about the time we reconsidered that order, he woke up. And seemingly, it's right after some coworkers came and prayed for him.
Wow.
He woke up and that was ended up being a turning point for him. He's still going to have issues. He would have a trach for another, he's 6 years old now, so he would have that trach for around 5 years. Got it taken out about a year ago.
Wow.
He's, like I said, he's 6 years old, but he's about the size of an 18-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very small. He's walking. He's doing great now. But, his journey really, it put me in my mom's shoes.
Yeah.
And now I wasn't I wasn't in the journey. I was watching it unfold as a parent, as a dad, no less. And that started this process where I realized that despite having 20 surgeries, going through a bus fire, going through a divorce as a young boy, I had started to believe things about myself that weren't true. And I'd never, even though I had endured all this crap, I had never faced it. I'd never put words to the emotions that I felt through any of that. And in short, I learned that if you don't put a voice to your emotions, they will own you. And my emotions owns me for much of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about the effect that this kid, Zacchaeus, had on my life, that his journey was kind of a catalyst of getting me to see how much I really had not overcome. When by all accounts, many accounts, most people would say I had.
Externally, you've survived, arguably thrived. Internally, things that you started to believe. I mean, no one can see what's going on inside.
Right.
But Zacchaeus' story was a catalyst to kind of help you face that, which is really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
You and I were both part of a group, for a while that we learned some different skills and training, so to speak. But that's hard to do, man. It's hard.
It's hard. And you can't do it alone. I always say, I've since kind of developed this phrase, you can't overcome anything you're unwilling to face.
Mm-hmm.
You got to face it first. So yeah, and in essence, it's really a lot, if not all of what I want to write about. And one of the things I've experienced in different ways is I had people come up to me and say, "Oh, wow, you went through all this stuff. I could never do that." Or I would have parents ask me, other parents that had children in the NICU while our son was in, and they would say, "Well, your son's been in for 6 months. We've only been in for a week. We don't know how you did it." And I always be like, "Well, one day in the NICU is too long.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it the same way I am. You get up every day and you show up." And that's what I like telling people, that like, no, just because I went through all this doesn't mean you are not any more or less inspiring than I am, because you're still here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Growing grit.
Yep. That's growing grit.
That's it. Don't shortchange yourself just because you haven't been in that scenario. No, I'll give you massive kudos. I love seeing the pictures when you put Zacchaeus up. I mean, because there's like so much spirit there. Like, there's so much life that he's just, it's like emanating out when I see those pictures. It's so fun. And you were saying there were 3 cases, none of which lived beyond 15 months, right?
Yes, sir.
And he's almost 6.
He's 6 years old.
And
if we're being really honest, we don't know what his prognosis is. Where is he going to go from here? But
sure. But for both you and your wife, but the SkilledDad podcast, so we're going to emphasize the dad side right now. It's both of you. It's a team effort thing, but sticking with it, staying in there, and going through the hard things that were probably hard for you and hard for him, but to have the paralysis that was needed. And so that is a kudos. I mean, that is, you did what you had to do, but there is something there too. And if I remember right, you weren't like just doing this thing alone. There were some people that came and around you.
Right.
Right.
I was thankful of having a great workplace that supported us.
Mhm.
Go to an excellent church. So we were well supported. I remember having one moment, just kind of like mentality, doing all that research and finding out that there were 3 cases and one, none of them surpassed 15 months. That will humble you really quick, but you'll
Mhm.
still trick yourself into believing as a dad, I don't know if it's a guy thing or a dad thing, like you can fix it.
Mm.
And shortly after doing all that research, I very distinctly remember being in a waiting room and dropping to my knees. And that was the point where I realized I have done all I can do. This is not up to me anymore.
Mhm.
And he was having a rough day that day. And I remember that was a point where I had to let go.
Mhm.
But then fast forward, literally 2 weeks later, he's having, he's in this rough season after his surgery. Again, same waiting room. My wife were in there. We had to step out of his room for a little bit because they had to clean up or something. And I remember getting up to go back into his room. My wife would not go in there.
Mhm.
She was gripped. And I said, "What's going on? Let's go back into his room." And she, with tears rolling down her eyes, she looks at me and she says, "I don't know what to do. I don't know if we need to let go and say our goodbyes, or we need to, I don't know whether to do that or have hope that he's still going to make it."
Mm.
And dude, let me tell you, these words did not come, they came out of my mouth, but I did not think them before I said them. But I went down and grabbed her by the shoulders and I said, "Listen, this kid's leaving the hospital. One day, this kid's leaving the hospital. Maybe not the way that we want him to,
Mhm.
but he's leaving the hospital. Our job is to be there with him in this journey, no matter how it ends."
Mm.
And it was one of those things when I said it, and I'm just like,
Oof.
what did I just say? It was a lesson for me as much, maybe more than it was her. And it changed the way that we saw his journey after that.
Wow. Our job is to be there no matter the outcome.
So
Wow. I love it.
that's growing grit to me. Is you're showing up no matter the outcome.
That's powerful,
Of
man. Thanks for sharing that story.
course.
Yeah. And you're continuing to show up and for all 4 of them.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Um,
It's been, there's no shortage of energy in our house for sure.
yeah. We bring them families together and just have the energy. We either need to hook up some
Right.
wires and power the community, or we're gonna lose a house. One of the two. But well, as we wrap this up, I love those stories. Out of your experience, with the dwarfism side of things, or with your life, I mean, we're all having takeaways that then we can apply. But also for those that maybe are not, we're all ahead of somebody. So for someone
Right.
that you might be ahead of, even just as a dad, whatever, what are a couple of things that maybe you would say, some advice that you'd bestow on somebody that's not to where you are yet, but might benefit from your perspective?
Number one, it's okay to fail. Both you and your kids. Teaching them to fail, I think, is one of the greatest things you can teach a child. And oftentimes you have to learn that first, um, or alongside with them.
Mhm.
Remember that you and your child's voice matters. Embrace the seasons, all of them. Like I missed my firstborn being a baby,
Mhm.
but that was a season, and we moved on from, you had a milestone, grew up, 11 years old now, so we're enjoying this season. So don't try to rush them, rush your kids' ages. Like, oh, I can't wait until they're grown up and out of the house. Cool, that will be fun when that season comes. And really, that all that to sum up, that It's always presence over perfection. Perfection never finds purpose. Presence does.
Mm.
So that's just really like, and when you're embracing failure alongside with them, and you're doing those things with them, it's kind of prerequisite, right? Like you have to be present to do all that.
Yeah.
So
Love it. No, it's good. The embrace the seasons thing. When I have some conversations, usually I say I can be a little direct at times. Try to wrap it with the good friendliness, and it's just like,
great.
don't wish time away. You know,
Yep.
you can waste money, you can burn money, whatever, but you can get money back. Don't waste the one currency that you cannot get back, and that's time. And it might be cliche, and I don't care, because one thing you said earlier on, which is the regret's going to stick with you. And when that time goes and they hit 12, 13 or out of your house, and you look back like, dang, man, what I wish I could have. So, hey, you're in that moment right now, today, after wherever you are listening to this podcast, what couldn't you do today that you look back on and be like, man, I'm glad I did that. You know, put yourself in that future shoes. But no, I love it. Embrace that season and presence over perfection, because perfection's a fool's errand. Just in case anybody doesn't know, there's no such thing as perfect within our realm here.
Totally.
Kris, thanks for getting on here with me. And it was fun. This always goes so fast.
Always, right?
Always. So we may have to do another roundtable thing we were talking about out in that treehouse. But
yeah, let's do it.
If people want to learn more about not only the Growing Grit newsletter, but kind of keep tabs on you, encourage you for your book, and just learn more about your story and follow you, any place you'd want to send them?
Yeah, you can find me on all the socials at Kris, and I'll just preface Kris with a K, Kris Hammons, Hammons. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Much more active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. You can also find me on my website, which is KrisHammons.com. There's not a whole lot there other than, hey, book me to speak, and I would love to speak at your next event. Even if it's a small sales team event, like nothing's too small for me at this point. I'm just trying to get the reps in. And lastly, of course, the Growing Grit newsletter, which is talking a lot about what we talked about today, along with documenting, trying to build up the speaking and writing business. And that's Growing Grit. You can either search that, or you can go to growing-grit.com.
Or you can click on the link in the podcast notes that'll be there, or the YouTube stuff that'll be there. So you got it now. You know where to go. At Kris Hammons and all the social side of things, growing-grit.com, or KrisHammons.com.
That's it.
I love it. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you being on here.
Hey, let's do it again.
Let's do it, man.
Thank you. The honor was all mine.
Guys and gals, if you got into this portion of the podcast, thank you for the attentiveness. I mean, it's pretty easy with kind of some of these gripping stories. But again, with Kris joining this podcast, super thankful. And the number one thing is that if you know somebody that can take something away from Kris's story or from this conversation, please share it with them. The other takeaway that I've got out of this, there's a couple, but I'm just going to challenge and encourage you. If you're listening to this and you've got that idea, that thing that you keep talking about, you got Kris and I right here saying, okay, cool. Show us the first draft. Go get that first draft done and go do something about it, because you're going to learn a lot. And from that failure, you're going to learn enough that you're probably going to have a better version too. And who knows, it might take you down a completely different path. But you know what happens when you don't do a thing? Nothing. So it's in your wheelhouse. Go get it. Go have some fun and embrace that season and time that you got with your kiddos right now. If you want to follow us on any of the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff, it's at SkilledDad. We also have SkilledDad.com, where you can go and learn more about some of the things that we're doing, as well as our future newsletter that we've been challenged now to go do something here. Also, I'd like to know things that you'd want to hear more of. Like, what do you find beneficial of these conversations? What do you find both the tactical and practical? Because the main goal of this whole platform is to help equip you as a dad, as a parent, to go and be impactful and feel confident about it, and also not doing it alone. But we look forward to seeing everybody on the next episode, and we hope that you can take away something from Kris's story on your journey to becoming the skilled dad.